Shall we start? We're ready to start. Could you please pass me the mic?
Good morning, everyone, dear colleagues and distinguished delegates. Thanks for choosing to spend this Thursday morning with us today. It's already end of the week, so we do appreciate your presence here. Today, we will discuss the digital threats that are posed to journalists and human rights defenders, South Caucasus, Central Asia, and Turkey. We have quite an expert panel today and a lot of issues to discuss. So let me start right away and present you the speakers who we have today. So far from my right, Emine Husseinov from Azerbaijan, a journalist and human rights defender, co-founder of Institute for Reported Freedom and Safety. We have Diana Serebrynik. She is Chief Executive Officer of Rights and Freedoms of Turkmenistan citizens from Turkmenistan. Coşkun Yorulmaz from Turkey, human rights lawyer from Solidarity with Others. Mamukan Gulatse from Georgia, the chair, media expert and the chair of Media Advocacy Coalition. And Anna Kapushenko, editor-in-chief of Klub from Kyrgyzstan. And it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Diana for.
Good morning. Thank you, Diana. So I represent the organization Rights and Freedoms of Turkmenistan Citizens, which hold ECOSOC special consultative status. So for many years, our organization has worked and documented torture, arbitrary detention, and forced disappearance and prosecution in Turkmenistan, and has advocated for justice for victims. However, in recent years, we've faced a new rapidly growing form of repression, digital prosecution. The Turkmen regime uses technology, social media, and misinformation as a tool of control and extended its reach far beyond its borders. We've seen how digital threats and surveillance has become a part of the regime's transnational strategy to silence activists and human rights defenders abroad. Individuals operating in Europe and Canada, including Murat Kurbanov, Akhil Sapar, Muhammed Uyecin, and Muhammed Al-Naif, falsely represent themselves as a member of the opposition while acting as informal collaborators of Turkmen secret services. They collect and transmit personal data of Turkmen citizens living abroad, which are then used for intimidation, harassment, and in some cases forced to return to Turkmenistan. A shocking example is the case of Mr. Farhat Nimankuliyev, who was forcibly returned to Turkmenistan and, according to credible reports, killed in custody after deportation. To conceal this crime, those involved spread false information, claiming that he was in Sweden or in the United States. One of them, Murat Kurbanov, even publicly threatened to ensure deportations of those who refused to cooperate with him. At the same time, our organizations have been subject to coordinated digital attacks. Defamatory YouTube videos, disinformation campaigns, and anonymous messages through encrypted applications containing death threats, sexual violence threats, and threats of kidnapping. Another form of attack involved in misuse of our organization's name and identity. On several platforms, a false video appeared claiming to speak on behalf of our organizations and its founders. It contains fabricated statements suggesting cooperating with certain groups that we have publicly criticized for their alleged links to Turkmen intelligence. These statements were made without our consent, misrepresented our positions, and were clearly aimed to undermining our reputation and credibility. We were forced to publish an official rebuttal to protect the organization's integrity and prevent further manipulations of our name. Beyond that, entire groups have created on YouTube and TikToks with the specific goals of defaming and insulting our organization's founder and staff. They coordinated content, spread false accusations, humiliations, and personal attacks, deliberately designed to damage reputations and discredit our human rights work. In addition, YouTube bots using photos of our founders have been created to post threats and offensive comments under our videos and amplifying harassment and psychological pressure. This campaign of digital intimidation mirrors the methods of physical repressions inside Turkmenistan: surveillance, defamation, and fear. It's a deliberate attempt to silence us, to isolate human rights defenders, and to erase independent voice from the digital space. We firmly believe that digital security is a human right. The international community must act by establishing rapid response mechanisms for online harassment, by holding corporations accountability for digital attacks, and by strengthening international solidarity to protect journalists and human rights defenders who continue to speak the truth. Authoritarian regimes want us to live in fear, but fear will not silence us. We'll continue to speak, document, and defend, because every silent voice weakens democracy, and every voice that dares to speak gives hope to the entire people. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Diana. It's a great pleasure to have you today on the panel and address our audience on these pressing concerns of digital and not only digital, physical security and well-being of human rights defenders from Turkmenistan. We believe that this is the region that's been oftenly overlooked. So thank you so much for being with us today. Mamuka, I would like to turn to you as we are observing a very disturbing developments in your region. So we would like to hear from you what are the threats in the digital space that now journalists and human rights defenders face in Georgia.
Morning. Thank you very much for this question and for raising this concern, because these days in other countries, but specifically I speak about Georgia, which is by the way formally an EU candidate country, which the country got just 2 years ago, and since December, especially since January, I would say, the situation has so dramatically changed that as a threat coming from both physical, digital, it's almost equal. Of course, physical threat and the violence is unbearable, and in direct sense it's not comparable. However, before the physical threat, physical violence, physical attacks, there is always preparation for background by digital propaganda, by digital attack. So this is just like legitimizing the violence and preparing for further attack. 21st century gives us a unique opportunity to access to global information around the world. However, the authoritarian countries, unfortunately, in case of Georgian government, has abusing this technological development to attack human rights defenders, media, journalists, and etc. Everything began 10 years ago when there were all indications that the building digital infrastructure of trolls, of troll factories, so-called experts, or forcing public officials who are depending on state budget to post, to share the information. There are dozens of media reports, investigation, and screenshots, voicemails, how, for example, director of the kindergarten, director of the school, or head of department of one small ministry or one small department, forcing to share, to post, to attack somebody, like this is our target, and etc. Besides, around 3 years ago, there was one of the biggest leak in our history. The file was called Church, and there are all indications that it was like the biggest illegal surveillance material. So, security service conducting illegal activity, and they then collected all the materials under the file Church. And we assume there are the files like politicians, media, and journalists, etc. So everyone in the country during a specific period of time had the communication with the representatives of the church, and plus inside the church was a communication. So they were conducting illegal surveillance. And then this material was analyzed and prepared the report. It was like ambassadors, staff of embassy communicating on very, very non-political issue. For example, next week we are going to have this meeting. Join us. And I remember that several journalists have identified themselves in this document, saying like, yeah, I remember this kind of meeting we had a couple of years ago. Like, it's this kind of meeting we have right now. If you read the written report, after 2 years, we could not remember all the details, but we can remember this was a meeting. It was like October. These persons were saying, etc. Around 20 journalists identified themselves, posted on Facebook that I'm on this list. And I realized that the number is even higher. I contacted with media outlets and said, like, can you collect the data internally, how many persons are affected? And they started asking inside the media outlets. This was mostly independent media outlets. And 70 persons identified themselves, just journalists, not mentioning politicians and etc. But the number is even higher, because several didn't want to be mentioned in the report, because then we published it. Then communicating pro-government media outlets, including public service broadcaster, and others said, look, this is a huge leak, one of the biggest leaks in our history. And we assume that you are also on this list. And first reaction, we are not dealing with illegal content. But at the same time, they're even posting right now, a couple of days ago, they posted allegedly secret conversation between opposition leader and former government leader, and then artificial intelligence checking test shows that like it has been modified, and there is a percentage around 85%. Even public broadcaster posted this. This was during the huge rally. And then we said, like, off record, can you tell us what's happening? There were also pro-government media outlets under illegal surveillance. Another real story shows the threat we are facing right now is two French journalists talk with each other about a third friend. It was just friendly chat and discussion. And as friends, are like sometimes we do not calling somebody openly in a way that you're calling during the mutual friendly conversation. And after finishing the conversation in 10 minutes, from pro-government media outlet, the third person about whom the talk got the call, and from the journalist who identified himself said, you know how your friends and colleagues are speaking about you? So it's a sign that this is evidence that digital threat is real, but also, like in case of the physical threat, they identify themselves that they are behind this. There are dozens of cases that they have took from the personal conversation some kind of materials and posted on video and etc. And this threat is very serious, very real. Unfortunately, many of us do not pay attention to the digital hygiene. Even if you pay attention, it's of course quite difficult to hide right now the information. But these cases once again shows that this is one of the serious challenges. Unfortunately, unlike in other countries, we do not have evidences which programs they use. It's like Pegasus, etc., like the reports, including in European countries and etc. Or there was a big scandal related with illegal surveillance of Swedish companies, etc. However, all these materials indicating and this troll, propaganda, etc., that digital threat remains one of the serious existential threat to independent media, to media, human rights defenders, and to ordinary citizens and activists who are publicly active.
Thank you, Mamuka. And indeed, as you said, the threat is real and it is there, so we have to spotlight it, as it was brought up in yesterday's panel of RFOM. So one would think that digital surveillance is a part of the job, but it shall not be, especially in a country that is in the process of EU accession. Anna, would you be ready to speak? So now we will have Anna Kabushenko, editor-in-chief from Klub. She's from Kyrgyzstan. She will be speaking Russian, and I'll be ensuring that you have a relatively okay translation to English. So be patient with that. Thank you in advance.
Yeah,
Добрый день. Я хотела бы сказать о том, что в Кыргызстане очень сильно ухудшилась ситуация в сфере безопасности журналистов в цифровом плане, в том числе...
So good morning everyone. I would like to say that the situation with digital rights for journalists and human rights defenders in Kyrgyzstan has deteriorated.
И не только журналистов, но и обычных граждан. Сейчас власти Кыргызстана приняли ряд законов, которые направлены на регулирование интернета и введение различных механизмов наказаний в отношении граждан и журналистов за критическую информацию.
So the government has adopted a number of laws that would regulate the behavior in the internet and
Could you translate once again the last phrase?
For and the sanctions for saying what is not what governments don't want to be said.
Кроме того, сейчас власти ввели госмонополию на входящий интернет-трафик в нашей стране.
The government has launched a monopoly on incoming internet traffic.
И получается, что они на постоянной основе отслеживают всю информацию, которая появляется в кыргызском сегменте интернета.
On a regular basis, government is aware of the information that appears in Kyrgyzstan.
Кроме того, журналисты постоянно подвергаются атакам со стороны провластных ботов в интернете, и это касается различных фейковой информации о журналистах, о том, что они зарабатывают очень много денег на грантах и так далее. В том числе это касается личной какой-то информации.
Journalists are normally targeted with bots attack, especially regarding the topic that they are becoming, they're making their wealth out of grants or some kind of personal information.
Власти не гнушаются публиковать различные ролики про журналистов, в том числе с сексуальным контентом.
The authorities are not averse to publishing personal information, including the sexual content.
Ситуация ухудшается тем, что власти очень тесно сотрудничают с Китаем и Россией и перенимают у них технологии по отслеживанию журналистов и не только журналистов, технологии и очень неприятные практики.
The government, the Kyrgyz government is in close cooperation with China and Russia. They are adopting from them techniques and practices on surveillance practices.
К примеру, в столице Кыргызстана и в нескольких других городах установлены камеры по отслеживанию людей по внешности, и это называется безопасный город.
In the Kyrgyzstan capital, there are cameras that recognize people's face, which is explained by the government as a means to ensure the safe city.
Если говорить про Россию, то, конечно же, практики, связанные с Телеграмом, они очень хорошо используют для того, чтобы смотреть, что происходит в Телеграме, что там публикуется, чаты и так далее.
If we talk about Russia, this is the Telegram, the messenger application that is used to track the information in Telegram.
Несмотря на то, что в Кыргызстане достаточно регулярно проводились различные тренинги по цифровой безопасности журналистов, сейчас мы находимся в той ситуации, когда эти тренинги становятся не сильно актуальными. И я сейчас объясню почему.
Despite the fact that Kyrgyzstan usually was an avenue for digital security trainings, nowadays we can say that these trainings are no longer needed.
Дело в том, что когда в нынешнем времени спецслужбы врываются к вам в дом, забирают ваш гаджет и сразу же начинают просматривать, что у вас в чатах, никакие пароли, никакие засекречивания ваших гаджетов не помогают.
Yes, so this is due to the fact that when security service basically enters your building and confiscates your private electronic devices, no kind of password will protect you from that.
Даже если они не успели забрать у вас гаджет, когда он был разблокирован, они заставляют вас написать пароль, угрожая пытками.
Even if they didn't have time to take your device when it was unblocked, they will force you to personally unblock it with the threats of torture.
И кроме того, даже если на ваших гаджетах нет никакой дискредитирующей информации, вас могут посадить на 5 лет за чужие видео, как это произошло с журналистами Глоба.
Even if you don't have any sensitive information on your devices, you can be prosecuted for the videos of others, in the way that it happened to journalists of both.
Получается, что сейчас безопасность, физическая безопасность журналистов в Кыргызстане, она выходит на первый план.
So now it's important to say that physical security of journalists in Kyrgyzstan is the primary priority. That's it. Thank you. Emin, let me give you the floor, and we move into Azerbaijan. We've heard for a couple of times during this session that Azerbaijan now has one of the biggest number of imprisoned journalists and human rights defenders in the OECE region. So we would like to hear from you what is happening there.
Thank you. Regarding digital threats, as my colleague mentioned, we have the same worse examples in Azerbaijan for the last at least 15 years, since 2011, the first documented case when the government used illegal remote surveillance and record personal life of prominent female journalist Khadija Ismailova. This case shows clearly who and how installed this equipment inside the private apartment, and they tried to use this illegally. Receive materials for blackmailing and to stop publications regarding the ground corruptions, including illegal access of President Ali. What we have today, we have already huge numbers of examples, including this recent Pegasus case, when Israel and Saudi provide technical assistance for the Azerbaijani intelligence agencies, and more than 1,000, approximately 1,000 journalists, human rights defenders, political activists, illegally included to this surveillance list, and government received remotely all personal information, business information from their gadgets. Today, we've already, together with our colleagues from Azerbaijan, with the lawyers, submitted dozens of cases to European Court for Human Rights. As Mahmoud mentioned, it's always difficult to that these kind of human rights defenders from Azerbaijan received dozens of threats, and a year ago he attacked in his house. 3 assassins killed him with 29 knife cuts. Imagine. He received his requested protections from the French government. Unfortunately, the protection is not provided to him on time, and he's murdered in his own house. And this case still is not investigated. Another case is the case of Mohammad Mirzadeh, also a prominent blogger. He is also received lots of threats, and only after a third assassination, he get like a 24/7 protection from the French law enforcement agencies. But it's only a lucky case with him when some Azerbaijani journalists able to receive like protections, for example, as Salman Rushdie. Lots of journalists, especially, we have like a few cases when activists or bloggers attacked in even in Switzerland, when I'm living in itself for the last 10 years. Some journalists received threats even in the US. And government especially targeted women journalists. And as my colleague from Kyrgyzstan mentioned, we have few cases in Azerbaijan when brave female investigative journalists are arrested. The law enforcement agencies who organize this detention operation is literally force them with sexual harassment. They say, if you don't unlock your device, we will rape you in police station. That is what Azerbaijani police said to Ulviya Ali. He is very prominent journalist, which is cooperated with a few exile-based media outlets, including with Voice of America. Imagine, like, if it's this kind of cases happen with journalists, which is have lots of these connections with exile medias, international medias. Imagine what's going those things happen with less prominent region-based human rights activists. I would like to add last stuff. This bad practice which is government used against first time started to use against Khadija Ismailova, these bad practices continued until today. They have installed illegal surveillance to private properties of the journalists. Imagine you are spending time with your life, let's say with your wife, and they recorded everything, and after starting saying, if you do not stop this, we can publish your personal relation with your own spouse, and we blackmailing you with this. And lots of journalists who receive this kind of threats prefer to not go publicly against the government, because it's kind of, let's say, mentality that people don't want to raise awareness with this kind of personal things. And digital and physical threats against journalists, when they're not able to do something significant against you, they're doing this against your relatives. Sometimes it's kind of collective punishment. They try to record your brothers or parents, etc., etc. They're looking for everything. Any kind of things which is able to do something against you. For example, we are very prominent human rights defenders, Rafat Safarov, which is arrested just the day before when he's supposed to leave for receive his award from State Department, because State Department, Anthony Blinken, and other high-level officials invited him to Washington, D.C. last year, just 2 days before International Human Rights Day. And when Rufat Safarov arrested, government tried to prevent this kind of important awards ceremony attendance, because they understand after when human rights defender received this award, it can get more prominent. And what they start to do, they start to record his father relations with some women. They just modified some videos, voice recording, organized some kind of videotapes and downloaded to anonymous Telegram accounts. They tried to broke up him and say, look, we will publish how your father cheating with other women. Imagine like this person, human rights defenders have a personal life, he has his own family, he's a very brave man. His father, like, is even not connected with him. His father, like a 65 years old man, he should have his own personal life, but when they're not able to find anything against Rufat, they find something and try to force him with this kind of cheap blackmailing, which is not connected with his cases. So I'd like to stop here.
Thank you.
We have a few sessions again.
Thanks. I mean, yeah, it's quite a grim reality that we face, and it basically seems like the government's using the same playbook to target dissent. Joshkun, is it so in Turkey? Would you comment on the digital threats, and not only digital, to human rights defenders and journalists?
Thank you. I just want to give you a snapshot of.
Could you please just close it? Just close it to you.
Okay, all right. Sorry. Is it on? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I just want to give you a snapshot of what's going on in Turkey at the moment in terms of media freedom. I mean, when it comes to digital security, I don't think Turkish government needs any clandestine way to control journalists, because I mean they set up the scene so successfully over the course of maybe 10 years or so. Maybe I'm sure you're aware of what happened earlier this year, what I call the Imamoglu protests. I mean, immediately after the protest, or during the protest, they started arresting journalists who were covering demonstrations. Because when it comes to student protests, especially older politicians, they get very easily spooked by it, because we have these history with student protests in the late 60s and 70s, and they find it very dangerous. So they, as soon as these the students appeared on the streets, not demonstrating for Imamoglu per se, but they were quite concerned that their future was in jeopardy, and they just wanted to prevent it, basically. And but of course, the Turkish government cracked down on those protests, especially the journalists. They started arresting journalists. I think 7, even photojournalists were arrested, and they started. They even arrested BBC's Turkey Istanbul correspondent, and they deported him as well. And any foreign media which wanted to come and cover the demonstrations, I think that there was a Swedish journalist. She was arrested at the airport and deported before she even set foot on Turkish soil, basically. And then came the broadcast bans. So they unprecedentedly they gave I think 3 TV channels 10 days broadcast ban, and you can imagine how severe that punishment is. And the person who is responsible of this ban, he said, well, you know, you have to follow the government narrative on this. We don't want any comment, any personal comment from journalists. If you don't toe the line, we are going to punish you as well. And this is what happened. But I will move back a bit. How did this happen? I mean, first thing what happened, I remember very vividly in 2015, Turkey amended the anti-terror laws, and of course making terrorist propaganda. And Ahmet Altan was arrested on such charges, but of course it wasn't enough. Then in 2022, Turkey adopted its first Disinformation Act, which means disseminating false or misleading information, which would to the detriment of public security and safety, so on and so forth. And Fatih Altaylı, for example, and this was in 2020, I think it was October 2022. Fatih Altaylı, a very prominent Turkish journalist, he was arrested under that particular act. And finally, last, of course, but not the least, now we have, since March this year, we have our Cybersecurity Act as well. And this is for if you disseminate any digital information which you have acquired, which was acquired. Yeah? So this is against leakages. Let me tell you why. Because Turkey, for the last 10 years, mostly, for example, the police had their own intelligence, and of course the MIT, the intelligence service of Turkey anyway. So everybody seems to be collecting data about everybody else. So now, a lot of people have a lot of information, especially in the Turkish government or in the public service. So, and obviously, they had to make sure that none of the data, which could be, compromising for certain people, would leak. And that is one of the reasons why this act was passed. And I will have to say, I mean, Turkey, I'm sure you're aware, is on the verge of some transformation. It has to happen because it's natural, and President Erdogan is not getting any younger, neither his coalition partners. So that will be a transition, it seems, and this has to be smooth. And because of that, I mean, we are seeing what we are seeing. We are seeing Imam being arrested, and we are seeing, some meddling into the CHP's business. So I think President Erdogan and his party, they're just envisaging a very smooth transition, and journalists, of course, they don't want journalists to muddy the water. So that's why we are seeing a lot of pressure on journalists nowadays. And of course, in my personal opinion, it's not going to get any better, it's going to get worse. But this is not a recent thing. So this is, some people in Turkey, well, it's happening to CHP, Halk TV, CHP, associated with CHP, is slapped with a ban. But come on, I mean, I've taken some numbers because I really need to remind myself of these numbers. Look, since 2018, 34 TV channels, 29 publishing houses, 53 newspapers, 37 radio stations. And you can imagine the journalists working on these. And I'm not even going to tell you about, because I used to represent, when I was in Turkey, journalists who were in jail. So, and I used to represent, as a lawyer, media companies who were shut down. So, it is not new, and it's getting worse. When this Media Freedom Index started, I think back in 2002, Turkey ranked 99. Well, you know, we always had a problem with media freedom. But now we are, I checked it today, for your sake, 160, we are 165th, okay? And the last time, honestly, the last time I checked, I think it was like 2 years ago or so, it was 140. It's a 49, yeah? So in a matter of a few years, we've gone down 15. And it's a free fall. But of course, who's responsible of this? They can take pride in knowing that we are still above Somalia, we are still above China. So this is where we are as Turkish citizens in terms of media freedom. I think this is. I can talk and talk about this, but we don't have much time. Thank you.
Thanks, Joshua. We will then move to the audience to have some comments or questions, as we have some time to discuss them. Would anyone have the will to ask or comment? Yes, please. Just make sure to introduce yourself. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. I'm Martin from the Swiss delegation here. I think it's really interesting what you said, Mr. Yorulmaz, about the disinformation law and how it's being used in Turkey. I've heard stories about people being charged with this for liking a tweet, for sharing a tweet, so that the limits are not very clear what distribution means of disinformation. So I'm wondering, in Europe, the issue of disinformation, and I love Norwegian colleagues that did a fantastic side event on this yesterday. There's a lot of talk about how we should react to this increased threat of disinformation in elections, in the system, in polarization of the societies, and creating these new measures. Is there a threat of creating new measures on this issue, like Turkey did, would particularly affect journalists in that way? Particularly, like what kind of, like your experience in Turkey, what kind of recommendations would you do that we keep in mind when creating new measures to combat the real issue of disinformation that is real on the democratic issues? Are there any recommendations that for states that are working on developing new measures on how to do it in a way without affecting the liberty of journalism?
Okay. Well, you know, as a lawyer, first of all, if
It's only just has to be.
right, all right, sorry.
Yeah.
Is it, yeah. Well, as a lawyer, first of all, if you hear any of your governments are preparing such a legislation, I would urge you, I would advise you to be very careful, because believe me, it's not going to be for the sake of the public. It's going to be for the sake of all who are ruling, the people. So this is what happened. None of these legislations that I mentioned, okay, they were to protect public order, or they always had an agenda. They always came before or after something. So, and the other thing is, well, if Western democracies, they think they are safe, no. I remember 10 years ago, I was talking to politicians, Western politicians, journalists, and whatever, about these issues back in Turkey. But and now I see the same stuff happening in the West. The same thing is happening in the UK. I mean, we have these discussions concerning freedom of expression, and of course, we are seeing what's going on in the US as well. It is going to come, unless as journalists, we come down on this unless we are very careful, yeah, and unless we come down on this before it even starts to happen. Believe me, we are going to find it on our doorstep sooner than we expected. So this is what I can say.
Thank you. Yeah. Many thanks.
Does anybody else have a comment or a question in the audio? So far, I see none. So we have a few more minutes till the end. So maybe I would ask a very general question to address each of our speakers. While we are here now at our international conference, what would you say can be done? What other steps can be taken by the OSCE member states to effectively counter what we've just heard? We've heard numerous stories of suffering of journalists and human rights defenders, of those brave ones who are on the front line of spotlighting human rights violations. What would your recommendations be for an address, a call to the international community? Anna, let's start with you and we will pass the mic.
Если мы говорим, например, об атаках, которые идут на журналистов со стороны провластных ботов, которые я озвучивала, единственный, наверное, способ от них защититься — это на них никак не реагировать или анализировать их без эмоций.
Yeah, so if we're talking about the bots attack, the most efficient way is to not react in any way and to not take it personally.
А иначе, если поступать иначе и принимать все на свой счет, то это приводит к тому, что люди прекращают свою работу и выгорают.
Otherwise, if you take everything said personally, we will just burn out.
Если же говорить о том, что происходит сейчас глобально по всему миру, да, мы видим, что цифровые угрозы вырастают, то мне кажется, что нужно больше обращать внимание на такие страны, как наша, потому что те практики, которые сейчас используются у нас, очень быстро могут быть использованы в европейских странах и в других демократических странах. И очень важно вот этот правый поворот, который сейчас случается, как-то предотвратить, что ли.
Talking about worldwide, I believe that it is essential to pay attention in our country because of the practices that applies in Kyrgyzstan. They can very swiftly move to European and democratic countries, and if we pay attention to this right turn that happens now, I believe it's important to prevent it.
It's very difficult but quite practical question. So, what's next? So, according to Freedom House report, like the global freedom has been declined for 19 consecutive years. Even in established democracies, there are serious challenges when it comes to media freedom and freedom of expression. When we speak about digital threat and online threat such, of course it is quite important to increase the skills of media literacy. So all generations should be aware how to consume media, how media is produced, how media is disseminated, and the way how you have to identify the sources of objective, unbiased media outlets. But at the same time, it's quite interesting what will happen with the European countries after adoption of DSA and Media Freedom Act. And at least at this stage, there are some good signs that this kind of regulation might be practically useful, and of course we have to quite actively monitor. And when we speak about generally, and so far, I mean, these recommendations issued on various occasions by OSCE or by Council of Europe, by the European Union, it makes quite clear that participating countries should respect freedom of expression, media freedom, and when it comes to physical violence and digital violence, it's quite evident they do not respecting these rules. So we have a situation, the rules are against you, and it's not a secret. So that's why for democracy, for democratic countries, as a matter of own survival, it's quite important not only to protect democracy inside within own country, but around the world, because these authoritarian practices spread quite actively. That's why we all have to defend and protect each other. And private sector, businesses, big businesses, they think that they can deal with all kind of regimes, but they have to be very, very careful, because media and democracy is the best guarantees for the businesses. That's why the sample should be of in other countries what's happening when the authoritarian countries are not satisfied with business activities, what might happen with them. So that's why all stakeholders should be quite aware about this threat.
So I think for its member states, our advice is that civil society need to use this international institution more active. No matter even US today is not super active, it's Donald Trump administration. What we observed for the last 3 days, like we didn't see like even some authoritarian dictatorships, member states, as like Russia or Turkmenistan, they're denied to let this Turkmen, human rights defenders criticize that they're denied to live. And no matter they're staying in the room or not, I think mandate holders, which is responsible for democracy and human rights, for media freedom, or national minorities, they need to be more publicly outspoken. At least we need to use them more effectively. That's why we address to them for, if you see like a country which is 10 million population, with 40 imprisoned journalists, with hundreds journalists under travel ban, with 1,000 family members also under travel ban, you need to speak up. Because it's like platform, like importance of this, we are sitting around the table even during the plenary on equal rights and principles. Each of the given states and civil society have the same time slots, and we're supposed to speak, no matter it's effective or not. But we don't need to say sometimes blah blah blah, because we need to be much more concrete, speak with evidences. And some countries, I think, like for especially for European like-minded states, they need to take a leadership, because when like a huge, like a big boss like the USA decide to step back, at least it's time for European solidarity. We observe for this kind of activizations within European institutions, with the European Union, and recently we observe for the European political communities. They are also do consolidations. They understand that they still need to collaborate with the USA, but related with OSCE, we should work with as well with OSCE, because Turkey is supposed to host it soon, like autumn sessions for states supposed to speak with him and ask him for, could you somehow manage to give friendly advice to your own government to improve the situation? We need to use all momentums and all opportunities. That's it.
I would also like to add that, as I mentioned, that digital security is also a human right, and I think that OSCE members, they should create some kind of a special mechanism to protect human rights defenders and journalists, but journalists, you have a little different situation, and you have more publicity than human rights defenders. So, and actually, human rights defenders were fully unprotected. And for example, in my country, Turkmenistan, they spend huge amount of money to create bots, to create different YouTube channels, to buy subscribers, to buy different people who will, who uses our photos and created awful videos with the harassment, with sexual violence, and with rapes. So that's all, and we're fully unprotected. And for example, there is no mechanism in YouTube that could at least check whether it's a real person or it's like a fake bot. I think it should be some kind of special mechanism that could protect people who said the truth, especially human rights defenders.
Maybe for upcoming challenge.
Here.
As well, I think challenge is supposed to do much more active dialogue with the civil society institution, because they are now in a super vulnerable condition. Seems like Trump administration decided to leave them alone financially and institutionally, and seriously damage civil society in all OSCE member states. It made like a domino effect. Lots of NGOs, like especially outspoken NGOs, not able to attend for such kind of important meetings. We have, like, for example, upcoming meetings for Ministerial Council in Finland, and I'm pretty sure for many NGOs, again, this is huge lack of funding, probably not able to attend, not able to organize side events. And for example, with these conditions, we don't understand how we can be more effective, because we have lost all our savings and resources for this year, and we don't understand how we can continue to operate, for example, in 2026. 2026 is a big dilemma for us. Maybe many NGOs decide to just stop working, because today, as I'm based in Geneva, but almost 9 months we are working, like 90% of our activities we are completely working pro bono. That's maybe it's also time for member states to support civil society partners who work with OSCE institutions. Even small support is important, just to buy them tickets, involve to their attendance of this kind of conferences, and again, that's it.
At least here I would like also to ask, or at least for Azerbaijan, we have some kind of grant support, but Turkmenistan is the country that no one is interested in, because they support that if it's a neutral country, everything is great inside it. And there are not so many organizations, NGO from Turkmenistan. So you work for bono for 9 months, we're working almost for bono for 10 years.
Yeah, and I just, for example, we have Civil Solidarity Platform, which is funding members for the
Where not?
But imagine each year since we exist, since 2011, we regularly have annual meetings during the Human Dimensions Conference in Warsaw. This year we're not able to come. That is kind of result for even informal institution, which is collaborate with OSCE as a long-standing partner, as a civil rights platform, not able to anymore even come here. Like some of fragmented stakeholders from platform, like members like me, were able to come. But again, it's like systematical problem. It's like we need to think about this, but it's some kind of indicator. I thank you.
Yeah, and I would like to thank you and all the panel, our experts for not only sharing the expertise, but also devoting your survive to doing what you do despite all the risks. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up this discussion, but we can continue outside the room. Many thanks to all.